founder. I apologize for a lot of the background noise. Where I live, it gets crazy loud. There is construction everywhere, above, below, next to me, this side, every direction. It's insane. But hey, you got to keep moving. So sorry about that. So we're going to continue talking about one of my favorite subjects when you're talking about search, which is query understanding. In the previous episode, I talked about how I think about query understanding and some constructs. I want to continue from episode 2, and then I want to dive deep into some very specific sort of area of query understanding, which is how do we manage date queries and weather queries and things like that. They're very kind of specific type of queries. So that should kind of help sort of drive this discussion. But sort of just to sort of jog my memory and everyone's memory, this is one of the ways sort of I'm building um, query understanding layer. And what you see on the screen is just how the whole sort of search execution goes through as part of query understanding. Once we get the query, there are some pieces that are not in this diagram. It won't fit in the screen. But what you're not seeing is extracting entities, extracting and metadata from the query. And we talked about in my previous video how you can extract explicit sort of information from the query, what the user has already mentioned, and then how you can derive in metadata that the user has not mentioned in the query, but you can derive, for example, location is something you can derive from the IP address or from the user's profile. Memories is something you can derive from the user's profile. Like you can match using semantic search, like a vector search you can do through all the memories that we know about the user, and then derive information and then use that again to kind of expand your query or enrich your query. Then you can do query expansion is something we talked about, where someone's just mentioned Elon, but you can expand it to Elon Musk and some other things. So that's sort of the precursor to this. But once you've done everything when it comes to extraction, you have to then sort of do obviously execute on the search query. And there's before this part that you're seeing on the screen, there are a couple more steps that I do, but kind of not very sort of interesting to talk about. But this is the most interesting part, where depending on the query, we may want to execute just code. Like the query is just, hey, calculate the tip. Or the query is, just was a factorial or some kind of mathematical calculation, and it could be even a data basically anything that a piece of Python code can execute. You see here Gemini Sandbox, which is what I'm currently experimenting with. There are lots of other options. The key is you want to do it in some kind of a sandbox away from your kind of main app, so that you can keep it secure. So that's important. Second thing is rich content. When I say rich content here, all that means is content that you get from what I call providers. So YouTube is an example. You can get rich content, the title of the video, description, views, tweets or X platform posts, maps, places. You have reviews and location, phone number, lots of things. You can get the idea. So that's rich content. This is something that I want to keep expanding. I've already worked on integrating places and YouTube and X. I've had the most fun integrating X. I mentioned this in my previous video. I just love what we're getting from the X platform, and thanks to the X platform team for giving me access. It's just incredible. They also gave me $500 worth of credit, so thank you. So that is just such a gold mine, and I want to use it the right way. I don't want to crawl or scrape or break any terms and conditions. So this allows us to call and query content while being compliant. So you're following terms and conditions. You're not just scraping. And yes, you have to pay for it, but that's the kind of company I want to build. I don't want to build a company based on sort of content that you're illegally scraping or crawling. So this allows for that. So it's really cool, and this goes a long way. This itself requires a series of talks on just the rich content, like everything I've been working on, thinking about in this space. As it turns out, everything on the web can be somehow translated into my version of rich content, and you can kind of like article. You can think of an article as a rich content where there's an author, there's a summary, there's metadata such as where it was published, what time it was published, how many comments, things like that. Yeah, it's really cool. So that's rich content. Real time is again obvious, kind of I say it here, X platform, but you can imagine other real time information sources such as stocks, like stock tickers, weather, all of that is real-time info. So the idea here is that you want to be careful. It kind of is a special box because you want to treat it with special logic, such as you can't really cache for too long. You can't cache the stock price of, say, Google or something for too long because it'll change. So caching is sort of paramount, but then there are other aspects to how you want to process it. So that's why I have a separate module just for real-time info. Again, X platform, stocks, weather, all that jazz. I love this piece. This itself can be a company if someone wants to build just a query, natural language query to real-time sort of data, JSON API. Like you can build a SaaS company just around this. I promise you, it's and there are obviously lots of companies doing it. But the way I am proposing is doing it in sort of small scale way, kind of like I am doing, so you can keep the cost low and share the savings to our users, other developers in this case. And that's kind of the mission. I'll slowly reveal sort of the mission, also why I'm doing this as I speak. But that's kind of one of the key tenets of the company that I'm building. That it's a small player. We need a smaller player with big ambitions and equal, maybe even better results than the big tech companies. But we're not completely driven by growth and ad revenue. I think the world needs it. So that's a big motivation. And if you support my journey, I mentioned in the previous video, I'll make sure it's worth your while. You don't have to pay a single dollar, by the way, to support. My Patreon page should be linked. You can just sign up $0 and just help me build this, give feedback, etc. Okay, and then creative is sort of what if you're literally just wrapping a LLM. We talked about this in the last episode. If you're just kind of taking ChatGPT and just writing a Python program, like, oh, anything that comes, any query comes, I call ChatGPT, send the response back. That's this box. And there are, by the way, a couple more boxes that are not here. This document's a little stale. To kind of complete the whole execution registry. So that's kind of the reason I like this diagram so much is a lot of people tell me like, oh, you're just kind of wrapping ChatGPT and this diagram, and this is a kind of a 10,000 feet diagram. It kind of shows that to build an AI search platform like Perplexity, it's a lot more than just wrapping a LLM or even multiple LLMs. Something else that I also want to talk about down the road is orchestration of LLMs. I think that's a big area, at least of my focus, and I think the industry also should be. I predict, which is you don't just rely on one LLM, but multitude of LLMs, but then you have to orchestrate those LLM calls. And oftentimes these LLMs are smaller LLMs, cheaper, faster. In many cases, you will probably only use open source. And you can do some really, really cool things. Like you can break down everything you want to ask. Like, for example, a big part is classification of the query and extraction, things like that. You can do that in parallel with smaller LLMs with similar latency, similar cost profile, maybe even lower if it's open source, than sort of just one LLM call. And so I've been experimenting with that. I started with one and I realized it's too much burden I'm putting on one or two LLM calls, and also it just gets a little hairy as you kind of demand more and more of query classification. So I think that's an area I'm very excited about. I'm sure a lot of people in the industry are already working on this. Nothing I'm doing is kind of no one's working on it. It's that's not the goal or mission of this whole enterprise. But I don't know many people who are building a search platform solo. The two from a place like this was so loud. Okay, so anyway, that's what the purpose of this is. And synthesis, again, we'll have several sessions. I'll be making many videos just on that synthesis. The idea is really simple. Put it all together. I mentioned it in my previous video. It's harder than it seems because if you just take everything, lump it, and say, hey, AI, summarize this. First of all, you may exceed the token limit because there's limited token, and even if you don't exceed token limit, you're going to pay an exorbitant cost because the cost is dependent on how much tokens you consume both in and out of the LLM, how much you send to the LLMs and how much you get back. That's how your cost is designed. And also latency. If you're sending a lot of data and expecting a lot of data, it'll be slower. So that's the kind of interesting thing. How do you how do you do it intelligently? And there are lots of techniques that you can use. Again, I've tried to use some, nothing sort of super sophisticated or fancy or anything, but like common sense. But it's been fun. But this is important, and some of these things I'll talk about in future sessions. What they are. That's kind of one of the bigger pieces of building a search platform. There's all the things in UX and things like that, and caching and some other pieces later we'll talk about. But I love this diagram. So I want to talk about one more diagram, which is this. You may be curious sort of how, sort of just what happens when the query comes, how I'm thinking about it. By the way, the idea here, I'm not preaching anything. This is not like how you should be doing it. This is not a course. It's just kind of, I'm building this in the open, and I'm just sharing how I'm currently thinking about this. And I'd like to learn from all of you if you have some feedback. But I like this diagram a lot. What happens when a query comes and how I'm thinking about this. And so this here, you can see you want to first do classification, routing, and as part of classification is extraction. All the things I talked about earlier, explicit and implicit extraction, all the things you can extract. Interestingly, I've mentioned this a little bit in the past video. Perplexity does something really cool. I like it. They've introduced an explicit step in their sort of query processing pipeline, and you'll see this. I don't know, again, if this is a pro feature or not, where they'll search your past memories or conversations. It literally kind of understands your query, processes it, and then searches your past conversation to kind of enrich. Really cool. I'm not kind of quite doing it that way. I think it's a little expensive, maybe at least the way I'm thinking about it. But I'm thinking a little bit differently, and we'll talk about that in maybe other sessions. I call it personalization. How do you personalize? It's, again, big area. All of these are big areas. This is why I love this. It's so many problems. Like computers, it's like computer science dream, scientist's dream. It's like so many problems, nice problems to solve. Okay, and you can solve it now. In 2025. All the companies like Google, Bing, these companies obviously have solved a lot of these problems, or at least tried to solve these problems. But some of the solutions that they've built, I've been at Google, I was working for Google Search. They were kind of ancient now. Their decisions were made decades back. Of course, they update, but it takes a while for them to catch up. Excuse me, sorry, what's going on with my nose? Some allergies, I'm sorry. Okay, but anyways, like back to this diagram. I love this diagram. So user query comes in, all the classification, extraction, and then routing. When I say routing here, what that means is how do we extract now data from the web, from like other sources, like what I call providers. You don't want to call all the you can think of providers as APIs, but they're not technically APIs. They can be MCP servers. They can be a few other things. They can be sandbox. Anyways, but how do you do that? You don't want to call all of them. That's a waste and useless most of the time. So you want to be intelligent about it. So there is that layer that kind of doesn't, you don't have a box here, but there's a box there to kind of decide for this query what makes the most sense. Oh, it's a mathematical query. We want to use the sandbox. Oh, this is a financial, like a stock query. Oh, this is like a query, for like Elon Musk or Sundar Pichai tweets or something like that. and you want to call Twitter or X platform or Maps or places, things like that. But here, this box, that's kind of is after that step. Once you know identified providers, then you want to extract. And right now, I'm extracting everything parallel because none of the extractors that I've developed have dependency on each other. But you can easily imagine where you extract in steps. So you can call something and the output of that goes into the next. So an example is places plus reservations. So you want to first find places and then for the top place or matching place. The metadata that you have extracted, you want to make a reservation. Maybe that's an odd case, but you get the idea. So that's where you have to do two steps. Right now, I don't have any two-step extractors, but the architecture that I've developed allows for that. Right now, everything's in parallel, one-step extractor. So you do that, fan out, basically fan out, and then wait, and then, synthesize everything. So here's some examples. Oh, you can't see it in the screen, but here's the first one. What is Taoism? And so this is a search only. So when I was running my tests on my current sort of platform code, none of the extractors kind of triggered probabilistically. So only web search. That's another, by the way, area I want to talk about. When you do web search, are you just taking snippets of web search results? Obviously, I'm not building an index of my own. That's a massive effort, and that too I talked about in my previous query. You're blocked from day one anyways. Like you try to crawl New York Times and you'll be blocked. So that's why I think, by the way, Google has a monopoly. I don't know if people quite realize it's not really, Google doesn't really have a monopoly because of Chrome necessarily, or just the web search as a product, Google search as a product. I mean, it does because of the huge market share, but this sort of underpinnings behind their monopoly, in my opinion, especially from a search, strictly search speaking, not browsers, is that they've developed the rapport, the respect, and the credibility over decades that websites allow Google to crawl. I'm sorry, by the way, I have serious allergies. So sorry. Sorry about that. Websites allow Google to crawl, but if you're a solo developer from nowhere, you're gonna be blocked. How do you build your own index? So if you do want to build, I know Exasearch. I use Exasearch as MCP. I believe they're building their own index. I think that their results are pretty good from my testing, but mostly technical queries. And if they're doing it, great job. I think we need more companies that build their own web index. I think one of the companies I'm looking forward to is Grok. I think with the Grokopedia and some of the stuff they're doing on the XAI side, I'm kind of excited. But we need, long story short, we need more companies who have access to the web index. Now, you can argue that the web index is becoming AI slop and spammy, and that probably is the case, but still, today it's important for the kind of product that I'm building, or even Perplexity. Like if you're building Perplexity, you kind of are dependent on web. So Perplexity also, I've heard they have a small web index of their own, and of course they use Google feeds and other things. But I'm hoping Perplexity is a big inspiration of mine. Great product. I'm a pro subscriber. I'm hoping they'll open up their index as an alternative and allow developers like me to use the index in a cost-effective way, not very expensive way. Like even the Google feed is so expensive, and there's so many quota restrictions. Like you can't get a high quota Google feed without talking with the Google account manager. It's just you're gonna get, I think by default, it's like 100 queries a day or 1,000 queries a day. It's very restrictive. So it's a big problem. But anyways, I digress. When you call web search, you oftentimes get a snippet. Is that enough to synthesize the result? Like in this case, what is Taoism? By the way, this restaurant, New York City, that shouldn't be search only. So that's, I think, incorrect. I have to update it. Now places trigger because I have the integrated Google Maps API. So this is kind of a little stale, but for this query, places should trigger. But for search-only queries, do you just use a snippet, but then it may not be enough. You only get a small snippet, and it's not a summary. It's like a snippet of the page, like of the article. So that's something that I'm spending time on. Right now, I'm only using the snippets, and in a prototype, I have some light crawling, but I have to do it in a fairly expensive way. I have to load it in a headless browser and fetch it, or you can use lots of APIs available out there, like Firecrawl, things like that. They're slow, they're expensive. It's just no good way. But I have to solve this, so that's on the back of my mind. But for now, I'm just using the snippets. You take all of that and kind of synthesize the results. For Taoism, that's how I do it: multiple web results and synthesize. Fairly simple. And of course, you use the model's intelligence. For places, this is kind of stale, but you should be using places results and metadata and constructing the response. And something else you can do, and I've been experimenting, is that can you combine? So like my architecture allows for places like restaurants in New York City. What is the query, by the way? Best restaurants in New York City. Do you combine web search results and sort of Google Maps API? And I've chose to do that because then you get sort of some nice other citations from the websites, like, oh, this was an award-winning Michelin star restaurant. That comes from the web, versus just places data is kind of very basic for the most part and structured. But you don't get a lot of the commentary, and you don't want to rely on the LLM because obviously the knowledge of LLMs is frozen when the model was built, and it can also hallucinate. So you can ground the data, and that's, by the way, another area, another huge problem to solve: citations. Like how do you construct a response with citation? Oh God, crazy problem. I spent a month just figuring that out. Yeah, so I've chose to combine web and maps, and also some light crawling, but it's an area I'm actively working on. So anyway, that's this. And the last thing I want to talk about is this thing, where what I call solo flow. This is very cool. Now, one thing I realized was when I was working on weather queries, I don't know if I should have prioritized weather queries. It's just I wanted, I thought they were a good technical challenge, and if someone asks weather, it was giving like very general. Like if you say weather Tokyo, weather in Tokyo is generally this, and in fall it's this. It's just, blah blah blah. And sometimes it would just make things up. So it was very bad. So that's why I wanted to integrate. So I integrated weather API from. You can see here. Where does it say? I'm using one of the free weather APIs. It doesn't say here. But anyway, I'm using one, but there's so many weather APIs. But one thing I realized was once I integrated the weather API, if I mixed in or blended in when in the synthesis phase, web search results also, it just kind of polluted the final response, and also kind of I didn't know what value I was getting. So I came up with this concept of solo mode, and what that means is if the weather provider triggers only show like only synthesize the final result from the weather data. Don't call other providers. Versus for many other queries, not all, multiple providers can trigger, and then there is a synthesis that happens.
Someone is at front door.
Yeah. Oh, someone's at the door. Yes. So that's the solo mode. So here's kind of example: skip the web search or skip YouTube. Like someone's asking a weather query before it was triggering YouTube, and like, oh, what the hell? So I thought it was pretty cool. I'm sure Perplexity does something like this. Maybe, I think. Although Perplexity is like, they do so much more. Like their stock page is like a Google Finance page. It's crazy, like how much work they've done on just the finance space. But I thought this was really cool, and it worked out nice. Again, when I'll demo the product, I'll share some queries. I bought the domain, by the way, for the product. So to be revealed soon, the domain. The domains actually about multiple domains, as in multiple TLDs for the same prefix. But yeah, I thought this was pretty cool. Another is time. Like, what's the time in San Francisco? What's the time in Tokyo? what's the time here, there. Same thing, solo mode. So I came up with that and some kind of, this is just probabilistic scores when you trigger things greater than 0.95, and it's a pretty strong signal, else do the normal execution. So that I thought that was, I wanted to talk about this. I thought this was pretty cool. Is this stupid? I don't know, but the results kind of finally look like what I'd expect. So they're simple. They're not very colorful, but if you ask for the time, you get the time. If you ask for the weather, you get the weather. And I think Sandbox should also be kind of solo mode. Like, no point call it triggering Sandbox and web results in YouTube and all that. You execute the Sandbox and you get the results of the Sandbox. So it should also be. I'll have to double check if Sandbox is configured. And the way I did this or worked this out is config like a YAML config file where I have different providers, and then I just configure like, oh, whether solo mode activated, like true false. So this way it's kind of config driven. If I want to change in the future, I don't have to change code, which is very expensive. So yeah, I should check if the Sandbox is also solo, but should be. But anyway, this is something I want to talk about. I thought it was really cool. So that's that. And I think what else? Oh, here's an example. Yes. So this is sort of a query in Japanese. I believe it says, what's the time in New York City, I believe. And then so solo mode kicks in, the geocoding happens. And then, oh, this is the weather query. I'm sorry. So Open Meteo is the weather API I'm using. But why am I using Open Meteo? I'm sorry, I'm confused. Maybe I'm using open. Oh, that's for I'm sorry. This is for geocoding. Yeah. Sorry, because you're getting query natural language, and then you return the time coding, time data. The geocoding is important, obviously, because you're getting queries in natural language. There is, by the way, nice geocoding API from Google, but all Google APIs, Maps API, are so expensive. So expensive. It's very hard to build bootstrap startups. I mean, I can imagine why everyone just jumps for funding. I mean, you have to work. I mean, look at. I mean, it's so loud, and working in a room like this, and you have to pay from my pocket. I'm paying from pocket. I've not had any income for 2 years. It's hard to do this, but my hope is that more people do this because I've never been happier. And the best time, like I'm working every day and I'm working all the time, every day, all the time, kind of, unless I'm literally taking a break and watching a movie or going somewhere. Otherwise, I'm always working. And I love it. No one's forcing me. So it's kind of, we're kind of getting philosophical here, but I want more people to experience what I've experienced. Yes, it's tough. You need to have some savings, but I believe the world will be a better place if there are more products and services from smaller companies, even solo founder companies. There are more options consumers get. And we give a real competition to really the big companies. I think that's a better world. It's like you don't want a street full of Starbucks. You want some mom and pop coffee shops and Starbucks. It's okay. We all need Starbucks. I like Starbucks when I travel. I like going to a Starbucks. But if I see a mom and pop shop, like I'll probably choose that. But otherwise, it's pretty safe to go to a Starbucks. So I'm not like, against big tech. I mean, I work there. But we need alternatives, and so many people I know who work at Google's and all these big tech companies who have the potential to contribute to the world, but they don't because the pay is so good, or maybe a little afraid, or some other reasons. So maybe this is maybe I can serve just tiny bit of an inspiration carefully. I want to say that because these are big decisions in people's lives, and there's a lot at stake. So that's kind of the other sort of tenet for me. Like maybe I can inspire one person to kind of do this, and not that people are not doing it, and I'm the messiah or anything like that. But the more the better is kind of the concept. So if one more person does it, inspired kind of by my story, oh my God, it's a big win, because the butterfly effect. Who knows what that person will contribute, and who knows how the world will change. It's a humbling feeling. But anyway, I want to talk about the solo mode. This was pretty cool. I like the solo mode and how geocoding was important. And I'm using the Open Mateo geocoding. But Google has a much better geocoding, but it's so expensive. I may apply for the Google startup program. I don't know if I'll get accepted, even though I've worked for Google. I don't know, but that would be nice. But there's so many restrictions, I believe, and I think you only get $2,000, which may not be a lot for the entire year. So I have to dig into that. But anyway, I think that's it. Do I have one more slide? I have one more slide, but I'll talk about this next time because I think this is already a pretty long video. I want to keep my videos to 20 to 30 minutes. This is already on the longer side. By the way, this is the first time I'm doing this in my life. So I need to get better. But what I thought was my video should be 15 to 20 minutes max. Today I'm double 30 minutes. I'm going to stop. But it's been a joy building this, and sharing this is yeah, I just want to share this and see how much I can build in the open. The more I can, the better, in my opinion. That's why I'm doing this. So thanks if someone's watching. I don't know if anyone's watching, but hasta la vista. I now know the finish button this time, so bye bye, take care.